A farmer abandoned an injured bull in a landfill, leaving it to die. But days later, something unbelievable happened. The bull returned, carrying something in its mouth that no one ever imagined was possible. What it did next will change everything. Watch until the end to discover how this story took a surprising turn. Subscribe to the channel and enable notifications to follow every twist in this incredible journey. In the vast expanse of Montana's prairie, where the wind carried whispers of forgotten promises and the sky merged with the earth in endless horizons, lived a rancher whose life had become as unyielding as his worldview. Jackson Calloway, a third-generation rancher with calloused hands and a weathered face that told stories of both triumph and defeat, was witnessing the slow collapse of everything his family had built. The Calloway Ranch, once spanning over 2,000 acres of prime Montana land, had dwindled to a fraction of its former glory. The devastating drought that had plagued the region for 3 consecutive years, combined with mounting debts and a faltering cattle market, had pushed Jackson to the edge of financial ruin. Each morning he would stand on his porch, coffee mug in hand, surveying what remained of his inheritance with a mixture of pride and despair. Another day, another battle, he would mutter to himself, a ritual that had become as routine as the sunrise itself. Among the small herd that still remained on his property was a magnificent bull named Thunder. The animal had been the pride of the Calloway Ranch, known throughout the county for his impressive stature and breeding capabilities. Jackson had purchased Thunder 5 years ago with the last of his savings, believing the bull would be the cornerstone of rebuilding his herd. For a while it seemed to work. Calves, sired by Thunder, fetched higher prices at auction, and there was talk of the Calloway Ranch making a comeback. But fate had other plans. During a particularly violent summer storm, Thunder had engaged in a fierce battle with a younger bull that had somehow broken into his enclosure. The fight had been brutal, ending with Thunder sustaining a severe injury to his right hind leg. Jackson had found him the next morning, lying in the mud, his powerful body now vulnerable and broken. "Come on, old boy," Jackson had whispered, kneeling beside the injured animal. "We've been through worse, haven't we?" Over the next few weeks, Jackson dedicated himself to Thunder's recovery. He applied homemade poultices passed down through generations of Callaways, administered antibiotics from his dwindling veterinary supplies, and even slept in the barn during the coldest nights to ensure the bull stayed warm. But despite his efforts, Thunder's condition worsened. The infection spread, and the once mighty bull could barely stand. His eyes, once fierce and commanding, now reflected pain and defeat. The reality of the situation weighed heavily on Jackson. Thunder represented a significant financial investment, one he couldn't afford to lose. But the cost of proper veterinary care was beyond his means, and watching the animal suffer daily was becoming unbearable. The rational decision would be to put Thunder down humanely, but Jackson couldn't bring himself to do it. The bull had become more than livestock. He was a symbol of resilience, a reminder of better days. One evening, after receiving another notice of foreclosure from the bank, Jackson sat at his kitchen table, head in hands, a half-empty bottle of whiskey his only companion. The walls of the house, built by his grandfather in 1947, seemed to close in around him. Photos of his parents, long gone, stared down at him from the walls. What would they think of him now? The man who let the family legacy crumble under his watch? The decision came to him in a moment of desperation and alcohol-fueled anguish. If he couldn't save Thunder and couldn't bear to end his life, perhaps there was a third option. The county dump, a desolate place on the outskirts of town, was surrounded by open land. Perhaps there, Thunder might find a way to survive on his own, or at least meet his end without Jackson having to witness it. It wasn't logical, it wasn't kind, but in that moment of profound despair, it seemed like the only way out. The next morning, with a pounding headache and a heart heavy with shame, Jackson loaded Thunder into his trailer. The bull, weakened by infection and pain, offered little resistance. The drive to the dump felt eternal, each mile adding to the weight of his decision. When they arrived, Jackson unloaded Thunder in a secluded area at the edge of the property, away from the main garbage heaps. "I'm sorry, old friend," Jackson whispered, his voice breaking. I can't watch you suffer anymore, and I just can't do what needs to be done." He left a pile of hay and a bucket of water, telling himself it might help, knowing deep down it was a futile gesture. As he drove away, he couldn't bring himself to look in the rearview mirror. The image of Thunder standing alone, confused and abandoned, was one he wanted to erase from his mind forever. The days that followed were a blur of routine tasks performed without thought or feeling. Jackson avoided the corner of his property where Thunder's enclosure stood empty. He ignored the curious questions from neighboring ranchers about the bull's whereabouts, offering vague responses about sending him away for treatment. Each lie felt like another stone added to the wall he was building around his guilt. At night, sleep eluded him. He would lie awake, imagining Thunder's fate. Had the animal found a way to survive? Had he been discovered by someone who might care for him? Or had he succumbed to his injuries, alone and afraid? The not knowing was perhaps the cruelest punishment of all. A week after abandoning Thunder, Jackson received a visit from Sarah Martinez, the young veterinarian who occasionally helped local ranchers when she could. She had just opened her practice in town and was making rounds to introduce herself. "I heard you had a prize bull," she said, sitting at his kitchen table, declining his offer of coffee. "I'd love to take a look at him if you don't mind. I'm trying to familiarize myself with the local bloodlines." Jackson felt the color drain from his face. "He's not here anymore," he managed, avoiding her eyes. "Had to sell him, times being what they are." Sarah nodded sympathetically, though something in her expression suggested she didn't entirely believe him. "I understand. It's tough out here right now. I've seen too many good ranchers forced to make difficult decisions." After she left, Jackson stood on his porch, watching her truck disappear down the long driveway. Her visit had stirred up the shame he'd been trying to bury. In the distance, storm clouds were gathering over the mountains, promising rain that would likely miss his parched land as it had so many times before. That evening, as the sun set, behind the rugged peaks of the Rockies, casting long shadows across his property, Jackson noticed a strange figure moving slowly along the fence line. At first, he thought it might be a stray from one of the neighboring ranches, but as he grabbed his binoculars for a closer look, his heart nearly stopped. It was Thunder. Impossibly, unbelievably, the bull had returned. His once gleaming coat was now dull with dust and grime, his powerful frame noticeably thinner. But what caught Jackson's attention, what made his mouth go dry with disbelief, was what the bull carried in his mouth. A dirty, tattered bag, dragging along the ground as he limped determinedly toward home. Jackson stood frozen, binoculars still pressed to his eyes, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. How had Thunder found his way back? The dump was over 15 miles away. And what was he carrying? Questions raced through his mind as he watched the bull's painful progress across the field. As Thunder drew closer to the house, Jackson finally broke from his trance. He rushed down the porch steps, his heart pounding with a mixture of shame, relief, and utter confusion. The bull that he had abandoned, the animal he had left to die alone, had not only survived, but had somehow made the journey home, bringing with him what appeared to be a message. Thunder stopped when he saw Jackson approaching, but instead of showing fear or anger, the bull stood his ground, his eyes reflecting an intelligence that seemed almost supernatural. In that moment, Jackson knew that whatever was in that bag, whatever Thunder had brought back from the brink of oblivion, was about to change everything. Jackson approached Thunder cautiously, his heart hammering against his ribs. Guilt and amazement, battled within him as he closed the distance between them. The bull watched him with steady eyes that seemed to hold neither forgiveness nor resentment, only purpose. "How did you—" Jackson's voice faltered as he reached out a trembling hand. Thunder didn't flinch away from his touch. Instead, the bull lowered his massive head, dropping the tattered bag at Jackson's feet. For a long moment, Jackson just stared at the dirty canvas sack, its edges frayed and stained with earth. It was secured with a length of weathered rope that had clearly seen better days. Time seemed to stand still as rancher and bull regarded each other in the fading light of the Montana evening. "I don't deserve this," Jackson whispered, though whether he meant Thunder's return or whatever lay within the mysterious bag, he couldn't say. With hesitant hands, he crouched down and untied the rope. The bag fell open, revealing a stack of yellowed papers, many of them stained with dirt and creased from being carried in Thunder's mouth. Jackson's first instinct was disappointment, just old trash from the dump. But as he lifted the first document, something familiar caught his eye. A signature he recognized from the family Bible and old letters stored in his attic. "Jeremiah Calloway," he murmured, tracing his grandfather's name with a calloused finger. Thunder watched intently as Jackson leafed through the papers with increasing urgency. They weren't garbage at all. They were land deeds, property surveys, and legal documents dating back to the 1940s. Documents that bore the Calloway name, not just for the ranch he currently owned, but for adjacent properties he'd never known belonged to his family. "This can't be right," Jackson said, rising to his feet with a handful of the papers clutched tightly. "These properties, they've been owned by the Hendersons and the Wilsons for decades." But the evidence was undeniable. According to these documents, the Calloway holdings extended far beyond what Jackson had inherited, encompassing nearly 5,000 acres in total, including prime ranch land that now housed expensive vacation homes and a commercial development at the edge of town. Among the papers was something even more intriguing: a hand-drawn map, its edges crumbling with age. Unlike the other documents, this wasn't an official survey or deed. It appeared to be something his grandfather had created himself, with X marks at specific locations across the properties. In the corner of the map, written in faded pencil, were the words, "For when the time comes, remember our legacy runs deeper than blood." Thunder nudged Jackson's arm, as if urging him to understand the significance of what he'd found. The rancher looked from the map to the bull, a chill running down his spine despite the warm evening air. "What am I supposed to do with this?" he asked, not expecting an answer from the animal, but needing to voice the question nonetheless. Back at the house, Jackson spread the documents across his kitchen table, organizing them chronologically as best he could. The story they told was both confusing and compelling. His grandfather, Jeremiah Calloway, had apparently purchased several adjacent properties during the post-war boom, using a series of holding companies to mask his ownership. But why? And more importantly, why hadn't Jackson's father ever mentioned these additional holdings? As he pondered these questions, a knock at the door startled him. Hastily gathering the papers into a pile, he went to answer it, finding Sarah Martinez standing on his porch again, this time with a worried expression. "I'm sorry to bother you this late, Mr. Calloway," she said, "but I wanted to check if you'd seen any stray cattle recently. The Collins place reported a bull wandering through their property earlier today, and I thought I'd ask around." Jackson hesitated, his mind racing. Should he tell her about Thunder's miraculous return? About the mysterious bag and its contents? Something held him back, a protective instinct toward both the bull and the secrets he'd uncovered. "No strays here," he replied, trying to keep his voice casual, "but I'll keep an eye out." Sarah seemed about to say something else when her gaze shifted past him to the kitchen table, where the corner of the old map was visible. Her expression changed subtly, interest flickering in her eyes. "That looks like an old survey map," she commented. My father used to collect those. He was fascinated by how the land around here was divided up after the war. Just some family papers, Jackson said dismissively, moving to block her view. Nothing interesting. Sarah smiled, but there was something knowing in her expression that made Jackson uneasy. Well, if you do see any strays, give me a call. And Mr. Calloway, sometimes the past has a way of finding us, whether we're looking for it or not. With that cryptic statement, she turned and walked back to her truck, leaving Jackson standing in the doorway, a cold feeling settling in his stomach. After ensuring Sarah had truly left, Jackson returned to the barn where he'd settled Thunder for the night. The bull's legs still looked bad, worse than before if that was possible, but there was a new vitality in his eyes that belied his physical condition. "What have you gotten me into, old boy?" Jackson murmured, stroking Thunder's broad forehead. "And how did you know to bring those papers home?" That night, sleep eluded Jackson once again, but for entirely different reasons. His mind raced with possibilities. If these documents were legitimate, the implications were staggering. The land alone would be worth millions in today's market. But there was something else nagging at him. The map with its mysterious markings. What had his grandfather hidden, and why? Morning found Jackson bleary-eyed but determined. After tending to Thunder and his remaining livestock, he returned to the kitchen and studied the map again. 3 of the X marks were on what was currently his property, but the others were scattered across land he'd always believed belonged to his neighbors. The closest X was near the old barn, in an area he rarely visited anymore. It had once been a storage place for hay, but the roof had partially collapsed years ago, making it unsafe. With the map in hand and a shovel over his shoulder, Jackson made his way there, Thunder limping loyally behind him despite his injury. "You should be resting that leg," Jackson told the bull, who ignored the suggestion completely, determined to follow. The area marked on the map was behind the barn, near a large oak tree that had stood for as long as Jackson could remember. As he approached, he noticed something odd. The grass grew differently here, in a rough square about 6 feet across. Heart pounding, he began to dig. The soil was surprisingly loose, as if it had been disturbed before, though not recently. After about 2 feet down, his shovel struck something solid. Dropping to his knees, Jackson cleared away the remaining dirt with his hands, revealing a metal container about the size of a footlocker. It was weather-beaten but intact, secured with a padlock that had long since rusted. A few strikes with the back of his shovel broke the lock. With trembling hands, Jackson lifted the lid, then sat back on his heels in shock. Inside were tools, not ordinary ranch tools, but specialized equipment he'd never seen before. Mining tools from the look of them, along with scientific instruments that seemed out of place in rural Montana. Several leather-bound journals lay beneath the equipment, their pages filled with his grandfather's distinctive handwriting. As Jackson leafed through the first journal, certain phrases leaped out at him. "The vein continues northwest. Assay. Results promising. Must keep discovery contained until patent secured." Tucked between the pages was a folded certificate, a mineral rights claim, dating back to 1951, registered to Jeremiah Calloway. "He found something," Jackson whispered, looking up at Thunder, who stood watching him with those knowing eyes. "Something valuable enough to hide. Something worth buying up all the surrounding land to protect." The implications were overwhelming. If his grandfather had discovered a significant mineral deposit, gold, silver, or something else valuable, and had gone to such lengths to secure and hide it, what did that mean for Jackson now? And why had the secret died with Jeremiah, never passed down to Jackson's father or to him? As these questions swirled in his mind, the sound of an approaching vehicle caught his attention. Quickly he closed the container and kicked some dirt back over it. Rising to his feet, he saw a sleek black SUV coming up his driveway, stirring up dust in its wake. The vehicle bore the logo of Westridge Development Corporation, the company that had been buying up local properties at an alarming rate over the past year. Thunder tensed beside him, sensing his sudden anxiety. Jackson placed a reassuring hand on the bull's flank. "It's okay, boy," he said softly, "but I think our discovery just got a lot more complicated." As the SUV parked in front of his house, two men in expensive suits emerged. One Jackson recognized as Blake Wilson, grandson of his nearest neighbor, and now a high-powered real estate developer who had left Montana for the bright lights of Seattle years ago, only to return recently with ambitious plans to revitalize the region. "Mr. Calloway," Wilson called, his voice carrying across the field. "Got a minute to talk? I have a proposition that might interest you." Jackson glanced down at the partially reburied container, then at the map still clutched in his hand. Whatever his grandfather had discovered, whatever legacy had been left, for him to find, he knew instinctively that Blake Wilson and his company were not to be part of it. "Thunder," he said quietly to the bull, "I think it's time we found out exactly what's buried in these hills, before someone else does." Jackson tucked the map into his back pocket and made his way toward the house, Thunder following at a cautious distance. The rancher's mind raced as he approached the men, trying to formulate a strategy. Whatever was buried on his property, and potentially his neighbor's land, wasn't something he wanted Westridge Development Corporation to know about. "Blake," Jackson nodded curtly as he reached the visitors. "Been a while. Didn't expect to see you back in these parts after you made it clear how much you hated ranch life." Blake Wilson smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. At 42, he was a few years younger than Jackson, with the polished appearance of someone who'd left rural life far behind. His companion, a sharp-featured man with calculating eyes, remained silent beside him. "People change, Jackson. I've come to appreciate Montana in ways my younger self couldn't." Blake gestured to the expanse of land around them. "This is Roger Mercer, my business partner. We've been acquiring properties throughout the county for a new development project." "So I've heard," Jackson replied, not bothering to extend his hand to either man. "The Silver Creek Resort, luxury homes for people who want to play cowboy 2 weeks a year." Blake's smile tightened. "We prefer to call it sustainable tourism. But yes, that's the general idea, and your property would be an ideal addition to our portfolio." Jackson crossed his arms. "Not interested." "You haven't heard our offer," Roger Mercer spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the clipped accent of East Coast money. "We're prepared to be very generous." "The Calloway Ranch isn't for sale at any price," Jackson stated firmly. "This land has been in my family for generations." Blake's gaze shifted past Jackson to where Thunder stood watching them. "Is that the prize bull I've heard about? Looks like he's seen better days." A flash of defensive anger surged through Jackson. "Thunder's recovering from an injury. He'll be fine." "Of course," Blake said smoothly, though his expression suggested otherwise. "Well, I'll leave our card. When the bank proceeds with foreclosure, and we both know that's coming, Jackson, call us. Our offer will still stand, and it would be better than watching this place go to auction." As the men turned to leave, Mercer paused, his attention caught by something on the ground near Jackson's boot, a corner of paper that had fallen from his pocket. Before Jackson could react, Mercer bent down and picked it up. "You dropped something," he said, glancing at it before holding it out. It was a fragment of one of the deeds, showing the Calloway name and a property description. Jackson snatched it back, his heart pounding. "Just some old family paperwork." Something flickered in Mercer's eyes, recognition perhaps, or suspicion. "Interesting. Well, think about our offer, Mr. Calloway. Properties in this area are becoming quite valuable." The emphasis on the last word sent a chill down Jackson's spine. As the black SUV disappeared down his driveway, he stood motionless, the piece of paper clutched in his hand. Thunder moved to his side, nudging him gently as if to break him from his trance. They know something, Jackson murmured, stroking the bull's neck. Or at least they suspect. We need to work fast. Over the next few days, Jackson divided his time between caring for Thunder's worsening leg and secretly investigating the locations marked on his grandfather's map. Each spot yielded similar containers filled with mining equipment, geological surveys and journals documenting Jeremiah Calloway's discovery. The picture that emerged was both astonishing and troubling. In 1951, while digging a new well on the property, Jeremiah had uncovered what appeared to be a significant palladium deposit, a rare metal now crucial for everything from catalytic converters to electronics. At the time, its value hadn't been fully realized, but Jeremiah, a former geology student before turning to ranching, had recognized its potential importance. Rather than announce his discovery, which would have triggered a modern-day gold rush, Jeremiah had quietly purchased the surrounding properties through shell companies, securing mineral rights throughout the valley. His journals revealed his intention to preserve the land until the metal could be extracted responsibly without destroying the ecosystem or the community's way of life. But before he could implement his plan, Jeremiah had suffered a stroke. The secret had apparently died with him, the documents hidden away and forgotten, until Thunder had somehow unearthed them at the dump and brought them home. He must have found them when they cleared out the old storage shed last year, Jackson realized, speaking aloud to Thunder as they stood in the barn that evening. The bull, now comfortable in his old stall despite his worsening condition, listened attentively. When Dad died, we threw away boxes of what looked like junk. These must have been among them. The discovery of palladium would explain Westridge's sudden interest in properties that had been considered marginally profitable at best. Modern geological surveys would have indicated the metal's presence, though perhaps not its extent. If Blake Wilson and his company acquired the land, they'd extract the palladium with no regard for the environmental consequences, turning pristine ranch land into an open-pit mining operation. As Jackson contemplated this disturbing possibility, a soft knock at the barn door startled him. He quickly covered the journal he'd been reading with a horse blanket before calling out, "Who's there?" Sarah Martinez stepped inside, her expression serious. "Sorry to disturb you, Mr. Calloway, but I saw your lights on and—" She paused, her eyes widening as she spotted Thunder in his stall. "The bull! He came back!" Jackson silently cursed his carelessness. He should have expected Sarah might stop. By again. "Found him yesterday," he said tersely. "Must have escaped from whoever bought him." Sarah approached Thunder slowly, her veterinarian's eye assessing his condition. "His leg looks infected. Why didn't you call me?" "I was handling it," Jackson replied defensively. "Not very well," Sarah countered, kneeling to examine the wound more closely. "This needs proper treatment, Mr. Calloway. Antibiotics, cleaning, maybe even surgery if the infection has reached the bone. You could lose him." The blunt assessment hit Jackson hard. He'd been so consumed with the discovery of his grandfather's secret that he'd neglected Thunder's deteriorating condition. "Can you help him?" he asked, his voice softening. Sarah glanced up, surprise evident on her face at his change in tone. "I can try. I have some supplies in my truck, but he'll need ongoing care." As Sarah treated Thunder's leg, Jackson found himself watching her with growing curiosity. There was something about her methodical work, her gentle words to the suffering animal, that reminded him of his late mother, a woman who had loved this land as much as any Calloway. "Why did you come back to Montana?" he asked suddenly. "I heard you had a successful practice in Colorado." Sarah didn't look up from her work. "My father was dying, cancer. I came home to take care of him." "I'm sorry," Jackson said, genuine sympathy in his voice. "Daniel Martinez was a good man. He worked for my father sometimes, fixing equipment." Sarah nodded. "Dad talked about your family a lot. He always said the Callaways were the only ranchers who treated him with respect, even back when that wasn't common for Mexican Americans around here. Something in her tone made Jackson pause. You said your father collected old land surveys. He was fascinated by them, Sarah replied, applying a bandage to Thunder's leg. He believed that the true history of this valley was hidden in those maps, who really owned what and why boundaries changed over the years. Jackson's instincts told him to remain cautious, but something about Sarah's straightforward manner made him want to trust her. And he needed an ally, someone with medical training to help Thunder, and perhaps someone with local knowledge to help him understand his grandfather's legacy. Sarah, he said slowly, if I show you something, can I trust you to keep it between us? She finished securing the bandage before standing to face him, her expression serious. That depends on what it is. If it's illegal or harmful, then no. It's not illegal. At least, I don't think so. But it could be complicated. Jackson hesitated, then made his decision. It's about the history of this land, my grandfather's legacy, and I think your father might have suspected something all along. Sarah's eyes widened slightly. The maps on your table the other night. Jackson nodded and retrieved the journal from beneath the horse blanket. Thunder didn't just come back. He brought something with him from the dump, documents that had been thrown away after my father died. Documents that prove the Callaway holdings are much larger than I knew, and that something valuable lies beneath this valley. As he explained his discovery, showing her the journals and the map, Sarah's expression shifted from skepticism to growing amazement. Palladium, she breathed, examining the geological surveys. That would be worth millions today, maybe billions, depending on the deposit size. And Westridge knows it, Jackson added grimly, or at least suspects. They've been buying up properties all around the valley, and they're pushing hard for mine. Sarah looked thoughtful. That explains why they've been pressuring so many ranchers to sell. My clinic treats livestock for most of the families around here, and nearly everyone has mentioned receiving offers from Westridge. She hesitated, then added, including my father's land. After he passed, they approached me almost immediately. Did you sell? Jackson asked. No. Dad made me promise to keep the property in the family. She smiled faintly. He always said. There was more value in that land than most people realized. I thought he was being sentimental. The parallels were striking. Had Daniel Martinez somehow known about Jeremiah's discovery? Had the two men shared this secret years ago? I need to find out exactly what my grandfather mapped and claimed, Jackson said, looking back at the ailing bull who had made this discovery possible. Before Westridge puts together the same pieces we have. We? Sarah raised an eyebrow. Jackson met her gaze directly. I could use your help, Sarah. Thunder needs medical attention I can't provide. And frankly, I'm out of my depth with all. Your father's knowledge of local land history might be useful if he left any records behind. Sarah was quiet for a moment, her eyes moving from Jackson to Thunder and back again. I do have his collection of maps and notes. I've never gone through them properly. She paused. But before I agree to anything, I need to know why Thunder was at the county dump in the first place. He didn't escape from a buyer. That wound is weeks old, and it's been neglected for most of that time. The direct question caught Jackson off guard. He looked at Thunder, shame washing over him anew. The bull returned his gaze steadily without judgment. You deserve the truth, Jackson said finally, turning back to Sarah. All of it. Even the parts that don't paint me in a very good light. As the full moon rose over the Montana hills, casting long shadows across the Callaway Ranch, Jackson began his confession. It was time for the truth to come to light. But little did he know that they weren't the only ones pursuing secrets buried in the valley's rich soil. Sarah listened in silence as Jackson recounted the full story of Thunder's abandonment, his voice occasionally breaking with emotion. He spared no details, including his despair, the whiskey-fueled decision, and the crushing guilt that had followed. When he finished, the barn was quiet except for Thunder's occasional shuffling in his stall. "That was a terrible thing to do," Sarah finally said, her expression unreadable. "An animal depends on you completely, and you betrayed that trust." Jackson nodded, accepting her judgment without defense. "I know, there's no excuse." "And yet," she continued, moving toward Thunder's stall, "he came back to you. Not only that, he brought something valuable." She stroked the bull's broad forehead, receiving a gentle nudge in return. "Animals are remarkable judges of character, Mr. Calloway. Thunder seems to believe you deserve a second chance." Relief washed over Jackson. "I don't know if I do, but I'm grateful for it. And please, call me Jackson." Sarah turned back to him, her professional demeanor returning. "I'll help you with Thunder, and with investigating your grandfather's claims, but on one condition. Name it. Whatever we find, whatever value lies in this land, a portion of it goes toward establishing a wildlife preserve in this valley. These ranches won't last forever, but the ecosystems they support should." The request surprised Jackson, but he found himself nodding without hesitation. "Agreed. I think my grandfather would have wanted that too, from what I'm reading in his journals." With their alliance formed, they developed a plan. Sarah would continue treating Thunder while searching through her father's collection of maps and historical documents. Jackson would focus on investigating the remaining locations marked on his grandfather's map, starting with those on neighboring properties. The next morning, Jackson drove to the public library in town, where the county's land records were kept. The elderly librarian, Mrs. Patterson, greeted him warmly. "Jackson Calloway, haven't seen you in here since high school. What brings you to our humble archives?" "Research, Mrs. Patterson, family history." She led him to a room filled with bound volumes of property records and survey maps. "Your timing is interesting," she remarked as she helped him locate the relevant sections. "Had another fellow in here yesterday asking about the same area. From that development company that's buying up all the land." Jackson tensed. "Roger Mercer. That's the one. Slick as oil, and half as pleasant if you ask me. Spent hours copying old surveys and mineral rights filings." This confirmed Jackson's fears. Westridge was piecing together the same puzzle he was. He needed to work quickly. For the next several hours, Jackson methodically cross-referenced his grandfather's map with official county records. The story that emerged was fascinating. Jeremiah Calloway had indeed purchased numerous properties through various shell companies between 1951 and 1955. More interestingly, he had filed mineral rights claims that never appeared in the public records, claims that should have been recorded, but somehow weren't. By late afternoon, Jackson had compiled enough information to be certain. His grandfather had discovered a significant palladium deposit and had legally secured the rights to it, but someone had deliberately removed those filings from public record. The question was, who and why? As he was about to leave, Mrs. Patterson approached with a dusty box. "Found this in the back room. It was marked Calloway, restricted. Been there for decades, apparently." Inside were more of his grandfather's papers, correspondence with the county clerk, a lawyer in Helena, and most surprisingly with Daniel Martinez, Sarah's father. The letters confirmed what Jackson had begun to suspect. Daniel had known about the palladium discovery and had helped Jeremiah map the full extent of the deposit. One letter in particular caught his attention. Dated just before his grandfather's stroke, it instructed Daniel to safeguard certain documents in case anything happens to me, and mentioned opposition from influential parties who would exploit this discovery without regard for the land or its people. Jackson's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Found something. Come to my place when you can." Dad left a journal. When Jackson arrived at the Martinez property, a modest ranch bordering the national forest, Sarah was waiting on the porch, a leather-bound book in her hands, and an expression of amazement on her face. "My father knew," she said without preamble. "He helped your grandfather map the deposit after they discovered it while digging a well. They were friends, despite the social barriers of the time." Inside, she showed him Daniel's journal, which detailed the discovery and the subsequent efforts to protect it. Dad wrote that certain county officials were bribed to lose the mineral rights filings after your grandfather's stroke. The company responsible was called Pioneer Minerals. Pioneer Minerals? Jackson frowned. "Never heard of them." "That's because they don't exist anymore," Sarah replied, turning to her laptop. "But look what I found in the state's corporate registry." She showed him a document revealing that Pioneer Minerals had been acquired by several companies over the decades, eventually becoming part of a conglomerate that was now the parent company of Westridge Development Corporation. "It's the same people," Jackson realized, "or at least their corporate descendants. They've known about this deposit for 70 years, and they've been waiting for the right time to seize it. DCD, and now, with palladium prices at a historic high due to its use in green technology, that time has come," Sarah added. They were interrupted by the sound of vehicles approaching. Moving to the window, Jackson saw 3 black SUVs turning into the long driveway. "Westridge," he muttered. "They must have seen us connecting the dots at the library." Sarah quickly gathered the documents, shoving them into a backpack. "There's a back door. My truck is parked behind the barn." As they slipped out the rear of the house, Jackson caught a glimpse of Blake Wilson and Roger Mercer exiting the first vehicle, accompanied by 2 men who looked distinctly like private security. "They're not just aggressive businessmen," Sarah whispered as they hurried toward the barn. "They're acting like they have something illegal to hide." "Because they do," Jackson replied. "Corporate fraud that spans generations, tampering with public records, probably bribery too." They reached Sarah's truck unseen and drove away on a back road that wound through the forest, eventually connecting to the highway that led back to the Callaway Ranch. Jackson called Sheriff Thompson, an old high school classmate, explaining that trespassers were at the Martinez property. "Can't do much if they're just knocking on the door, Jackson," the sheriff replied. "But I'll send a deputy to check it out, make sure everything's above board." When they arrived at the ranch, Thunder was waiting at the fence line as if he'd sensed their urgency. The bull's condition had improved slightly with Sarah's treatment, but he still moved with obvious discomfort. "We need to document everything," Jackson said as they hurried into the house. "All the maps, journals, land records, everything that proves what my grandfather discovered and what Westridge's predecessors did." They worked through the evening, organizing the evidence and making digital copies. Sarah's veterinary training had given her meticulous documentation habits, which proved invaluable as they assembled the complex historical narrative. "There's still one location we haven't checked," Jackson noted, pointing to an X on the map that lay in what was now the Henderson property, land that Westridge had purchased just 2 months earlier. "According to Dad's journal, that's where the main shaft was," Sarah said. "They dug a test mine to determine the size of the deposit. Your grandfather sealed it up afterward to keep it hidden." Jackson stared at the map, a realization dawning. "That's where Westridge plans to build their resort's main lodge. The plans they've filed with the county put a massive structure right at that spot." "They're not building a resort," Sarah concluded. "They're establishing cover for a mining operation." A sudden noise outside caught their attention. Thunder, bellowing a warning from his stall. Jackson moved to the window and saw headlights approaching down the long driveway. "They're here," he said grimly, "and I doubt they're coming to make another offer." Sarah's phone rang. "Sheriff Thompson, just got a call from one of my deputies," he said when she answered and put the call on speaker. "Those men at your place weren't just looking around, Sarah. They were searching it thoroughly, claiming they had permission. When my deputy questioned them, they produced papers saying they're interested in buying your property and were conducting an inspection. That's a lie, Sarah insisted. I never gave them permission. I figured as much, Thompson replied. But they've got fancy lawyers and documentation that looks legitimate at first glance. I've asked them to leave until we sort this out, but I wanted to warn you both. These people play hardball. After ending the call, Jackson and Sarah watched as the vehicle stopped in front of the house. 5 men emerged, including Blake Wilson and Roger Mercer. What now? Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the tension. Jackson looked out at Thunder, who stood alert in his stall despite his injury, then back at the documents spread across the table, the proof of his family's legacy and of corporate malfeasance, spanning decades. Now, he said, reaching for his grandfather's journal, we use their own greed against them. He opened the door before they could knock, standing tall in the doorway. Blake, twice in 1 week, to what do I owe the pleasure? Blake's smile was tight, his eyes cold. Jackson, we need to talk about your grandfather's activities on this land. Funny, Jackson replied calmly. I was just learning all about that myself, along with some very interesting facts about Pioneer Minerals and their creative approach to public records. A flicker of surprise crossed Blake's face, quickly masked. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. Jackson stepped back, gesturing to the living room. Come in. Let's discuss how your company has been trying to steal what rightfully belongs to my family for 3 generations. As the men filed in, tension crackling in the air, Jackson caught Sarah's eye. They had prepared for this confrontation, but now faced the reality of challenging a powerful corporation with seemingly unlimited resources. Whatever happened next would determine not just the fate of the Callaway legacy, but the future of the entire valley. The atmosphere in Jackson's living room crackled with tension as Blake Wilson and Roger Mercer settled onto the worn leather sofa. Their security men remained standing, positioned strategically near the exits. Sarah stood beside Jackson, the collection of documents carefully arranged on the coffee table between them. Let's cut to the chase, Mercer began, his tone condescending. Whatever you think you've discovered is irrelevant. Westridge has legal claims to develop these properties, including mineral extraction rights transferred from Pioneer Minerals. Jackson spread out his grandfather's mineral rights filings, the ones that had mysteriously disappeared from county records. These documents say otherwise. My grandfather filed these claims legally in 1951. They were deliberately removed from public record after his stroke. Blake leaned forward, examining the papers with narrowed eyes. Even if that's true, which I doubt, the statute of limitations ran out decades ago. These claims are worthless now. Perhaps in court, Sarah interjected, where your company's expensive lawyers could tie this up for years, but in the court of public opinion. She placed Daniel Martinez's journal on the table. My father documented everything. The bribes your corporate predecessors paid to county officials, the systematic effort to erase the Callaway claims while waiting for Jeremiah's heirs to lose the land. That's a fascinating story, Mercer said with a dismissive wave. Completely unprovable, of course. Jackson smiled thinly. We thought you might say that, which is why we've already sent copies of everything to the State Attorney General's office, the FBI's Public Corruption Unit, and 3 national news organizations. He was bluffing. They hadn't had time to contact anyone yet, but the flicker of uncertainty in Blake's eyes suggested the tactic might work. You're making a serious mistake, Blake warned, his composure slipping. This valley needs the economic boost our development will bring. The resort will create hundreds of jobs. The resort is just a cover, Jackson countered. Your real plan is to extract the palladium deposit, regardless of the environmental damage it would cause. Once you've stripped the land of its value, you'll abandon the resort project, claiming economic factors made it unviable. Mercer's face hardened. You can't prove any of that? Actually, we can, Sarah replied, pulling out more documents from the backpack. Your own environmental impact statement, filed with the county, conveniently omits any mention of the palladium deposit. Despite 3 separate geological surveys your company commissioned in the past year, she placed the surveys on the table, documents she had obtained that afternoon from a sympathetic clerk at the county offices. Blake and Mercer exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. The security men shifted uncomfortably. "What exactly do you want?" Blake finally asked, his voice tight. "First, Westridge withdraws all development plans for this valley," Jackson stated firmly. "Second, you acknowledge my family's mineral rights claims and provide compensation for the decades your corporate predecessors spent trying to steal them." "That's absurd," Mercer scoffed. "We've invested millions already." "Third," Jackson continued as if he hadn't spoken, "a significant portion of the land will be placed in a conservation trust, preserving it for future generations and establishing wildlife corridors through the valley." Blake stood abruptly. "This conversation is over. We'll see you in court, Calloway." "Before you go," Sarah said, her tone deceptively casual, "you should know that a 12-year-old boy from town has been documenting this whole situation." This stopped Blake mid-stride. "What are you talking about?" "Ethan Miller," she continued, "budding wildlife photographer. He spends a lot of time in these hills with his camera, including the day Jackson abandoned Thunder at the dump." Jackson winced at the reminder but nodded. "Ethan saw everything. He's been keeping a journal of his own, complete with dates, times, and photographs, including pictures of your men conducting unauthorized geological surveys on my property. At night, this was another bluff, but one based on a kernel of truth. Ethan was a real kid who often hiked the area taking nature photos. Whether he had witnessed anything relevant was unknown, but the possibility clearly unnerved the Westridge executives. "The boy also photographed Thunder's return," Sarah added, improvising. "How he brought back documents that your predecessors thought were lost forever. It's quite a story, one that would make compelling headlines across the country." Outside, as if on cue, Thunder let out a resonant bellow that carried through the evening air. The sound seemed to hang in the room, a reminder of the improbable sequence of events that had led to this confrontation. Mercer's confident facade finally cracked. "This is blackmail," he hissed. "No," Jackson replied evenly. "This is justice, long overdue. Your company has been attempting to steal my family's legacy through fraud and manipulation for 70 years. I'm simply reclaiming what's rightfully mine and ensuring the land is protected as my grandfather intended." The standoff lasted several tense seconds before Blake sank back onto the sofa, his expression calculating. "Let's be reasonable. There's a compromise to be made here. What if Westridge partners with you? We have the resources to extract the palladium responsibly with minimal environmental impact." "Minimal is not good enough," Sarah interjected. "This valley is home to endangered species and critical watersheds." "We need time to consider our position," Mercer said, attempting to regain control of the situation. "Perhaps we can meet again tomorrow, after consulting with our legal team." Jackson shook his head. "No more delays. You've had 70 years to consider your position. I want your answer now. Comply with our terms, or we go public with everything." The tension in the room was broken by the sound of vehicles outside. Sheriff Thompson had arrived with 2 deputies, responding to the call Jackson had placed earlier reporting trespassers. The arrival tipped the scales decisively. "Fine," Blake conceded tersely. "We'll draft a preliminary agreement tonight, but this isn't over, Calloway, not by a long shot." After the Westridge contingent departed, followed closely by Sheriff Thompson to ensure they left the property, Jackson and Sarah stood on the porch, the weight of the confrontation still hanging in the air. "Do you think they'll honor any agreement?" Sarah asked, watching the taillights disappear down the driveway. "Not willingly," Jackson admitted. "But with the evidence we have, they don't have much choice. Their investors would abandon them if this scandal broke." They walked to the barn to check on Thunder. The bull greeted them with a gentle nudge, his dark eyes seeming to understand the significance of what had transpired. "He's looking better," Sarah observed, examining his injured leg. "The antibiotics are working. He's a fighter." "Like his whole species," Jackson said softly, stroking Thunder's broad forehead. "Stubborn, powerful, sometimes unpredictable, but ultimately loyal to those who treat them with respect." The next morning brought unexpected news. Sheriff Thompson called Jackson early, his voice carrying a note of astonishment. "You're not going to believe this," he began. "Roger Mercer was arrested at the airport this morning trying to leave the country. Apparently, the FBI had been investigating Westridge for securities fraud and environmental violations for months. Your confrontation must have spooked him into running." The news reports that followed revealed the extent of Westridge's crimes, not just in Montana but across multiple states. Blake Wilson turned state's evidence, providing authorities with detailed accounts of the company's illegal activities in exchange for leniency. In the ensuing weeks, as Westridge Development Corporation collapsed under the weight of indictments and investor lawsuits, Jackson and Sarah worked with environmental attorneys to create the conservation trust they had envisioned. The palladium deposit would remain largely untouched, with limited extraction permitted using new technologies that minimized environmental impact. True to the rumor that had circulated, 12-year-old Ethan Miller did indeed emerge as an unexpected ally. Though he hadn't witnessed Thunder's abandonment, he had been photographing wildlife in the area for years and had inadvertently documented Westridge's covert geological surveys. His innocent hobby had produced compelling evidence that strengthened their legal position immeasurably. One crisp autumn morning, as golden light bathed the valley, Jackson stood at the fence line beside Thunder, whose recovery was progressing well. Sarah approached, carrying a thermos of coffee and a stack of papers. "The final conservation easement documents," she announced, handing him a cup. 15,000 acres preserved forever, including all the critical habitats and watersheds. The sustainable extraction plan for the palladium will fund conservation efforts across the state for generations. Jackson surveyed the land. His land, his grandfather's land, with a sense of profound gratitude. "I still can't believe Thunder found those documents at the dump. Of all the things he could have brought back." "I've been thinking about that," Sarah said thoughtfully. "When animals are injured, they often seek out familiar places and things that provide comfort. Those papers had your grandfather's scent on them, maybe your father's too. To Thunder, they smelled like home." The explanation was simple, logical, yet somehow it didn't diminish the wonder of what had occurred. Sometimes the most ordinary explanations still left room for something remarkable. "The trust needs a name," Sarah continued, sipping her coffee. "The attorneys suggested something with Callaway in it, given your family's history with the land." Jackson shook his head, watching Thunder graze peacefully. "No. Call it the Thunder Basin Conservation Trust. None of this would have happened without him." Sarah smiled. "I like that. And speaking of Thunder, Dr. Reynolds from the university called. He's very interested in Thunder's genetics. Apparently, bulls with his particular bloodline are becoming rare. He wants to establish a breeding program to preserve the lineage. Another legacy to protect," Jackson mused. As if understanding he was the topic of conversation, Thunder raised his massive head, regarding them with those intelligent eyes that had seen Jackson at his worst and somehow forgiven him. The public confession had been Jackson's idea, a video statement released to local media describing his moment of desperation and Thunder's improbable return. He had expected condemnation, but instead received mostly support and understanding. Ranchers and farmers who had faced similar financial and emotional crises recognized their own struggles in his story. His honesty had resonated in a way he never anticipated. The Martinez and Callaway ranches had been officially combined now, their operations restructured to focus on sustainable practices. Sarah's veterinary clinic occupied the renovated barn, providing care for livestock throughout the county. The old Henderson property, reclaimed through legal action against Westridge, housed an environmental education center where visitors could learn about the delicate ecosystems of the Montana valleys. "You know," Sarah said, leaning against the fence beside him, "your grandfather's journals mentioned that he always believed the land would find a way to protect itself, that the truth would eventually surface, like water finding its path downhill." Jackson nodded, thinking of the improbable chain of events that had led to this moment, his desperate decision, Thunder's remarkable journey, the long-buried documents, and the unlikely allies they had found along the way. "The land endures," he said simply. "Long after we're gone, it remembers." In the distance, storm clouds gathered over the mountains, promising the first snow of the season. But here, in this moment, the sun still shone on Thunder Basin, illuminating not just a landscape preserved, but a legacy redeemed. Thunder moved closer to the fence, pressing his massive forehead against Jackson's outstretched hand, a gesture of trust and forgiveness that still humbled him daily. The bull that he had abandoned in his darkest hour had not only returned, but had brought with him the means of salvation, for the ranch, for the valley, and for Jackson himself. Some might call it coincidence, others divine intervention. Jackson preferred to think of it as the land working through its creatures, the past reaching into the present to safeguard the future. Whatever forces had guided Thunder to those documents, whatever had compelled him to bring them home, the result was the same. A second chance, not just for Jackson, but for everything and everyone connected to this place. And as the first snowflakes began to fall, dancing in the golden afternoon light, Jackson knew with absolute certainty that his grandfather would be proud of what they had accomplished, not just preserving the land, but honoring the deeper truth that had guided Jeremiah Calloway's actions all those years ago. That some treasures are too precious to exploit, and some legacies transcend the bounds of ownership to become something greater, something that belongs to the future as much as to the past. "Come on," Sarah said, touching his arm gently. "Let's get inside before the storm hits." As they walked back to the house, Thunder watched them go, his powerful frame silhouetted against the darkening sky. A guardian of secrets now revealed, a bearer of truths once lost, and a living symbol of the unexpected paths that redemption sometimes takes. Dear listeners, we hope the tale of Jackson Calloway and Thunder has touched your hearts as deeply as it has ours. The journey of redemption and second chances reminds us that even in our darkest moments, hope can find its way back to us in the most unexpected forms. For more emotionally powerful narratives that explore the depths of human experience and our connection to the land we call home, we've curated a special playlist available by clicking on the link to your left. If this story moved you, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day, we bring you unique stories that delve into life's complexities and the remarkable resilience of the human spirit. What was your favorite moment from Thunder's remarkable journey? What other stories of second chances have inspired you?